Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Pick a Mix podcast. And today we have got in my opinion, the incredible Alex Fairlamb. And I'm super excited because I'm genuinely, we've been chatting offline, obviously, so now I know a little bit more. But I didn't know much about her really. I read her stuff and stalked her online like most of us do. I went to a recent sort of conference talk with her and Rachel Ball at Research Ed, and was kind of like, wow, get that person on the podcast. So here she is. So yeah, welcome. I suppose we should start off with a bit about kind of who you are and what you do at the moment.
So I'm an assistant principal in charge of teaching and learning and CPD and also kind of literacy and oracy. And I'm a trust teaching and learning network lead as well. So I coordinate kind of some CPD opportunities across the trust. But I have also just finished writing my PhD. But I also do kind of like a lot of work kind of outside with the history community. So I'm an honorary fellow of it's hard to say, honorary fellow of the Historical Association. So I do a lot within the history community. And as you've kind of mentioned, I do kind of a lot of writing outside of that as well.
Yeah, cool. And so I'm assuming that history was the subject, was it?
Yeah, so history is the subject that I absolutely love and geek out about. So yeah, the kids often say when I'm teaching, my eyes will glaze over.
Okay.
I'll just go into like a monologue about history. So yeah, I absolutely love history. So I'm very blessed to be able to teach that subject and have a captive audience who can't escape.
Yeah. My daughter's just started year 10 and she chose history, and she's kind of doing these flashcards every night of things that she learned in the day, and then she's kind of quizzing us in the car, and so I feel like I'm going through my kind of missed GCSE all over again, which is just a joy.
Yeah. It's a wonderful subject. It's just so full of so many different narratives.
Of course, yeah.
And that's the best part of it, is being a storyteller. And the kids being like, no way,
Yeah.
oh my. Yeah, no way. It's a brilliant thing to see.
Yeah, amazing. All right. Well, for those that are new to the podcast, we have a kind of, the guests come on, they've made some selections ahead of time, and that creates the structure for the conversation, really. And we typically start with something called a fast friends question, which are designed to kind of create connection and find common ground. And the first one that you chose was, given the choice of anyone dead or alive, who would you have as your dream dinner date?
Okay, so I've gone a little bit vulnerable with this one. So I've actually gone with my mum.
Oh,
So my mum passed away a couple of years ago from pancreatic cancer. It was a very rapid passing of 3 months from diagnosis to actually her no longer being with us. And so effectively, I would love nothing more than to have a meal with my mum, because she was hilarious.
wish it.
I mean, the two of us are just like absolute twins,
Really?
which terrified my stepdad because the thought of there being two of us. So I'd love nothing more than to be sat at a dinner table with my mum, chewing the fat, having far too many glasses of Prosecco, and just to hear her laugh one more time would be amazing. But I think the key part why I selected her was towards the end of her passing, I began to kind of collate her stories about when she was younger.
Oh, yeah.
And there were so many different stories. And unfortunately, I didn't get through everything that kind of I hoped that I would. And I feel there's so many parts of her life, like, because I think as a child, like, your parents' life begins when you do.
Yeah.
And I was like, God, I've been really arrogant all my life, not wanting to know who my mum was before me. So I feel a little bit sad that there are all these kind of like fabulous stories of kind of hijinks that she'll have got up to and kind of mischief. So yeah, I kind of wish that I had the opportunity to find out how much of a little terror she was.
Oh, I love that.
I have found her school reports,
Really?
and yeah, she was a character. Yeah, which is interesting considering how much she absolutely berated me as a child to like follow all the rules. That I never had one detention.
Right.
So I find that quite, I find that interesting. So that would be my
Very
dream.
nice. And what a nice, again, the dream for me of this podcast is that people take away key takeaways and they go and do things differently. And maybe that is a call out, the thing that was running through my mind is that, I should do the thing you did. I should go and find out about the hijinks my dad got up to when he was younger, and you know, what did your mum do for a job?
So she was actually an FE. So my mum actually left school with no qualifications. She was very much into equestrian.
Oh,
So she was doing like kind of like groom work and stuff like that for different riders. And then after she'd had me, I was a second child. And following a divorce, she got a job working in FE, kind of doing admin.
okay.
And then she worked her way up through various different colleges in the Northeast. And then she actually did a degree whilst working full time. So her last role was vice principal in charge of marketing, but she did a
Wow.
lot in terms of community learning. So adults who perhaps were looking at later to life education and getting them employment and things like that. So for me, she was really inspiring in terms of ensuring that everyone, no matter their background or their age, has the opportunity to engage in education and have access to job
Yeah.
opportunities. So yeah, it was really inspiring that she did a degree whilst working full time, which is why I thought, well, if she can do that, then I should be able to do my PhD whilst working.
Yeah.
So she was in FE, which I always feel is kind of seen as like the poor relative of
Oh, yeah.
education.
That's
It's
strange,
such
that,
a
isn't
transformational area of education. It's so
it?
important. And I always say, like, it's undervalued because I don't know if you can tell that this hair is not natural.
Yeah. Okay.
And so my hairdresser is an absolute genius, and what he knows about quantities in terms of maths and the
Yeah.
chemicals and all those different things, like that is some really key knowledge.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I think it would be really great if FE was better
Absolutely.
recognised for being such the important part of education that it is.
Yeah. Well, and for me and you, if you've ever tried to teach a load of teachers or adults, you know how tricky that is. That kind of they've perfected the quietly quitting. Inside their head they're off somewhere else, and yet they can still nod and smile and.
Yeah,
That's interesting.
yeah. I
Well,
think many of us are mentally truanted during a
I
meeting.
love
So.
that actually. I'm going to use that instead. Mentally truanted. There'll be a launch pad coming out like that at some point. What
I can write that for you. I'm an expert.
would make both of us cry, but your mum will be dancing her heart out when you get your PhD, won't she?
Yeah, she would have loved that. She would have absolutely loved that. So yeah, hopefully if I pass,
Oh, you'll be fine.
she'll be very much with us in spirit on graduation day.
All right, let's get on to your first ignition point then. So again, for those that are new, these are events that have happened in people's lives that have created some sort of transformation. And the first one you put down was when you left teaching in 2011. Tell us a bit why that was a transformation.
So I started teaching in the school that I was on my second placement at. So I was very fortunate to get a job there. So I mustn't have done too badly in my placement, or they were desperate. But effectively, about 2 years into it, I was very much feeling the burn of it. We were a very small department of two people, which when you're teaching all the way up to A level, and you've got A level classes, which for both of us were about kind of size between 20 and 28, and it meant that there were two of us doing all the curriculum. I am a very diligent person, and I probably gave too much of myself to the job in terms of trying to meet the kind of demands. Not because anyone was pressuring me to, but because I wanted to do the best for the children in the school. And so I felt by the end of a couple of years that I was very much burned out and I wasn't feeling the joy. And that kind of feeling of the job consuming me and feeling a little bit miserable. And no one wants a miserable teacher in the classroom. I was like the mood hoover. I was like, oh, which just isn't me. So yeah, I kind of thought, right, well, maybe teaching isn't right for me. So I began to explore other careers, and being a historian, I found a job at Living History Museum in the Northeast.
Cool.
Yeah, really, really cool. So it's got like periods all the way from the kind of it's got like the Edwardian period, but it's also got kind of they do a bit of a Tudor period and stuff like that. So people on site are dressed up in costume. So I went to go and work in the education team with the Arts Council and major partner museums. So effectively, whilst I was based at this museum, my job was to continue to support their educational programs and attendance of school groups, but then go to the other museums where there'd been a drop in school attendance and develop workshops with them, telling local stories and narratives to try and get more school visits to take place.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like almost like trust improvement, but like museum improvement,
Yeah, I love
which was wild because I never worked in museums before. So it was great that they took a punt on me. So embarking on a new career was really daunting, but it was probably the most inspiring creative job that I've ever done, because my day was exploring archives and uncovering unknown or lesser known kind of local stories that I thought would really engage local communities and bringing them to life. And it meant working in areas that I'd never worked for, so significant areas of deprivation and need. So we're talking about Sunderland North area, rural deprivation. So, challenging cohorts of children that I'd never had to engage before because I was so early on in my teaching career, and trying to find ways to kind of engage them in being interested in these stories, both within the classroom and at the museums. But it also meant working with their local communities. So it wasn't just the schools, it was how I could engage their local communities to come to the museum and find out about World War One and the suffragettes and things like that. But I think as well, I had the opportunity to host a whole range of events. So my boss was really great, because I'd go to him and I'd say, I've been reading the story about the suffragettes delivering their newspaper by bikes, and there's one in Durham called Connie Lucock. And there's the Virgin Cyclone bike race is coming up soon. Do you think we can borrow the vintage bikes from the store and dress up as suffragettes and do it? And he was like, yeah. So we're on these 1910 bikes and doing like this 6 mile bike ride. Of course, it broke down all the way, but it was great. But yeah, that was good. And then things like there was the Common Poster Parade, which took place on Northumberland Street in Newcastle, which is where they did kind of a protest. Right. So I said, can we recreate that on Northumberland Street in Newcastle? And so we did. So we had a kind of anti-suffragette, suffragette kind of debate. Right. And it was amazing. And that was really great, because not only did it reignite my creativity, my passion for my subject, and challenge me to work with children who were particularly disengaged or communities that were disengaged, but also as well, it led to me taking up my MEd again. Yeah. So the first part of it was PGCE. So I only had 2/3 left to complete, but I hadn't taken it up. So I actually decided to explore, as part of my MEd, the second part of it, how can immersive museum experiences and immersive spaces be a powerful conduit for learning and long-term memory retention. Okay. And it was part inspired by David Libeskind, who has designed the Imperial War Museums and also the Jewish Museum in Berlin. So he purposefully, as the architect, creates these spaces which is make you feel things. Right. So when you go to the Jewish Museum, there are voids in the building, and it's meant to kind of represent that there are parts of the Holocaust that we can never understand or know fully about. And when you go to the Imperial War Museum North, it's very jarring to represent war and conflict. And so I thought, actually that's really interesting in terms of how cultural institutions could potentially do the same for our students. Yeah. So I focused on that, which was really great. And then that's led me to continue kind of looking at how to look at cognitive science and how we can enhance deep learning, but then also to continue my academia. And as you may have guessed, I returned to the classroom. Yeah. I'm not dressed as a suffragette at the moment. No. Maybe tomorrow. But I think, I learned so much about how to connect with different stakeholders, how to bring stories and narratives to life, and how, again, to take joy from what I was doing as a career.
Yeah. That's the key thing for me, I think, that I'm getting from this, is that potentially, your fire, for want of a better word, had gone out.
Yeah.
This thing 100%. Reignited it. And there's a message there for leaders, I suppose, to look around their teams and to look at where people's fires are less than they used to be or completely gone out, to return to that phrase, quiet quitting, who's just going through the motions. And I guess as leaders, our role is to, if we can, reignite it. And as you've demonstrated, if you can get someone's fire burning again, the results are, incredible, aren't they?
100%. And I think it's that, as you said, I think it's about doing kind of our duty of care and checking in on different people, particularly new to education, where that transition to where you've got quite a heavy ECT program, and then you've got new specifications, or you might be teaching topics that you've not taught before, and it can become quite overwhelming. Yeah. So how it is that we can, as leaders, make sure that there are mechanisms in place which identify that rapidly, and that we have a really kind of creative approach to how we can keep those fires kind of burning. Yeah. Because for me, leaving the classroom gave me broader experience to then come back, and my attitude and approach to teaching has so much stronger. And I'm not saying that means you send someone off for 2 years to go and work in a museum, but effectively, what other opportunities and experiences can you expose them to? What can you take off them in the short or medium term to expose them to these things which are going to help to ignite them and kind of keep them buoyant? And I think, that's really important in a retention recruitment crisis.
Brilliant. Yeah. All right. Well, now we're going to move on to your first, the first launchpad that you selected. And again, for people that are unfamiliar, this part of the podcast, we basically ask each guest to choose 2 launchpads from the Launchpad book. And then I kind of narrate what I was thinking when I made it. And then we ask the guest kind of why it resonated with them and why they picked it. So let me just quickly, for those that are watching on the video, share my screen. This first one that you chose is, well, I shouldn't have favourites, but this is definitely a favourite of mine because I had no idea that this term pre-mortem even existed until about a year or maybe 2 years ago. And so, this idea that sometimes, we need to start in quite a dark space in order to find the light. And that means kind of imagining the failure of a project before you even start it. And sometimes that kind of pre-thought or forethought can actually save it. And so when I did a bit of digging around on that, you find a fairly well-established process. And so this was what kind of came up when I started looking around, this idea that the first thing that we need to kind of do when we're doing one of these pre-mortems with our team, so the scenario would be, look, we're about to launch this project, or we want to launch this project. Let's first begin with the end in mind. Let's think about what could go wrong. And so this idea of kind of bringing all the stakeholders together and making sure that you've got lots of diversity and sort of setting the scene and making sure right from the beginning that people feel safe enough to be honest, because that's kind of the point. You want people to say, but what about this, but what about that? And there's almost a license to be negative, which, for me personally, I need to be given the license to be negative, because usually I try to stay as positive as possible. And if I don't like something and I don't feel safe, I just keep it inside. So that's dangerous. So then they talk about kind of step 2 being this idea of imagining the failure. And you've got to try and do that in as much detail as possible and be as creative as possible. Almost don't put any filters on what you think might go wrong. Don't kind of hold back at all. It's all about kind of what are even the craziest things that could happen, and then try to prioritize those. Like, okay, well, in terms of threat, how do they rank in terms of most likely or most impactful? And then the fun bit, I suppose, looking at, okay, well, if that might go wrong, what might the causes be? And that's quite a creative kind of process. What contributes to that? Kind of, are there any patterns? Is there one thing that might cause multiple failure points? But also, I think, and this is uncomfortable, I've done this a few times recently where people have challenged my assumptions, and it's both a kind of quite an awkward, uncomfortable situation, because usually they're unconscious, and then you bring them to the front of your mind, you're like, God, I do assume that boys are more badly behaved than girls. And you think, oh God, and you feel bad because you shouldn't assume it, but actually, the way to get around that is to kind of bring it to the surface. So that's a useful part of it, I've found. And then this idea of kind of, okay, well, if we know this might happen and we think this is the cause, what solutions could we put in place, what mitigations, those sorts of things. And then finally, they say that it's not, it might not be that what you learn is just for the people that created it. You have to kind of give it to a wider audience. And so kind of really taking some time to not then rush off and launch into stuff, but just to stop, reflect, kind of, okay, what have we learned from this? What were the causes? What were the solutions? Who do we need to communicate with? And then, like everything, and this is something that I guess is fairly straightforward, but it's burned me a few times, that you have to just monitor. Like, I'm terrible at monitoring. I'm like, yes, I've launched it, great. What's next? What's next? I want to do all the exciting stuff, and so, the process typically finishes with that commitment to controlling the ongoing project. So that was kind of what I was thinking when I came out with it. But why did it resonate with you?
I think it resonated with me because effectively, like, I was aware of the strategy, but then in the melee of like the busy things that I was doing at the time, I forgot to use it. So I'm going to talk about when I didn't use it and then when I learned to use it. And it's the same strategy, effectively. So I became, so I was in charge of teaching and learning, and then literacy came under my remit, and it was a new area for me at the time. And so I was told to come up with a literacy strategy. So I did that, and it was evidence informed, and it was everything that I wanted to be: reading, writing, EEF, all that kind of sort of stuff. And I was like, right, in 1 year we're going to achieve this. Off I go, and I launched it. And as you can imagine, like, I think it was Alex Quigley that says, like, all good, really good ideas die on the vine, and it was a really good idea, but it more than definitely like died a death on the vine, because effectively, like, it was too much too soon, and I hadn't really done that work that pre-mortem enables you to be able to do. And I think, the best way that I can think of it is that I was trying to feed a baby a 3-course banquet.
Right.
And so when I moved to my new context, again, I was in charge of teaching and learning, and I requested to be in charge of literacy. And I was like, right, I really do believe in this strategy, but what I need to do is I need to do a pre-mortem. And actually going through that process has led us to developing a really strong literacy program, which is what I now include in the talks that I do when I talk about the golden 5. So kind of your 5 kind of literacy strategies that you might consider looking at. Because with that, I realised that it needed to be chunked and sequential, and that actually 1 year, you're not going to do reading, writing, explicit vocabulary instruction and oracy in 1 year. And if you think that you can, then I tried it. It just won't make you popular. But actually, it's about looking at the readiness of your staff, and then looking at, how you kind of build upon that as a progression model, and building in those kind of pause points. So effectively, we should be on to writing this year as part of year 3. But actually, I feel that disciplinary oracy needs another year to kind of breathe before we move on to that kind of writing aspect of it. So I think the benefits of doing a pre-mortem was that basically it made me think, what could go wrong? What might be the barriers that middle leaders, they themselves, can foresee, both as leaders, but then also their teams? So things like content time. So I think it was Ben Newmark that did a piece of work on Pearson EdXL history, where if you teach it over 2 years, effectively you're introducing a new concept every 20 minutes.
Wow.
And so effectively, you're going to get people saying, well, how do I, when I've got content to get through? And so that made me realise that we've really got to kind of understand that if they can't read it, they can't access the curriculum. So you kind of put the cart before the horse. And so actually thinking about ways to work with middle leaders to kind of overcome those kind of barriers and kind of think about it. And also why some people might not buy into it. We don't really do this in my subject, what's the importance of it? So with the pre-mortem, it really made sure that that I ensured that the middle leaders were consulted. They were part of that pre-mortem kind of procedure, and they provided suggestions and raised things from their perspective and subject, which meant that I was then better able to launch with the staff. And I actually now launch every initiative in a May time rather than September inset, because September inset, I mean, I'm still trying to remember how to teach. I'm trying to remember passwords. So actually it was suggestions like that. And just things like, if we're expecting teachers to be form time reading, which I think is a really powerful strategy, if we're giving them a plump book to lay down and read in front of the students, where's the crib sheet? Because a busy teacher isn't going to have the time to read a whole text and then plan out the questions. And so actually creating like a crib sheet with chapter by chapter questions and vocabulary. So I think those sorts of things were really useful in terms of, as you said, what's the project? What are the things that could cause it to be derailed? What would be the cause of that? And how can we work together as a community to overcome those different barriers?
Cool,
and that community buy-in.
I'm thinking that the two things there that you finished with, that kind of working together and buy-in, like the pre-mortem, process, if done properly, is a great way of getting more people involved, getting their buy-in, getting their engagement, listening to them. It does dual things, doesn't it? It builds engagement and alignment and commitment, as well as uncovering things that might be a blind spot to the person who is making it.
100%. And I think modeling that to people, so doing that with middle leaders. And then when I launched the literacy strategy, I actually did kind of like, I put up a scenario on the board from a blog about, the leader of literacy on the first day of inset is told to launch a literacy strategy. And it had like the scenario, and it was like, what could go wrong? And everyone was like, wow. So actually like modeling that and being like, we've done a pre-mortem, like I promise, but you will probably still come up with things. So just let me know. And I think modeling that vulnerability and creating that psychological safety to be able to kind of say, look, Alex, I know you did a pre-mortem, but, and then that they then use that as a strategy within their own practice.
Brilliant. All right. Well, let's keep pushing on. I'm really interested about this next one. So the next Fast Friends question that you chose was about your most treasured memory. So tell us about that.
Oh, this is really cheesy and awkward. So please never send this to my husband because he'll just get like such an inflated head. But I'm gonna say my wedding day. Yeah, it was my wedding day. So I am very socially awkward and nervous. Which then when people are like, "How can you be a teacher?" And it's just like, "Well, you project, don't you?" And that sort of thing. So I really struggle in kind of group scenarios. So I have a ban on, when people do the whole birthday cake thing in a restaurant.
Right. Don't ever do it to you.
Yeah, like my wedding photographer said that he never saw someone walk up the aisle and back down the aisle so quickly because I hate with attention. So we actually split the wedding into 2 days. So we had like a small ceremony with a small group of family and chosen family, and then we had like a big kind of like party. And for me, being surrounded by, so my chosen family is like my friends, being surrounded by my family and chosen family and my dog, and my husband, obviously. Him. It was a wonderful day, and it was just one of those days where the kindness and the care was palpable in the air, where I just really had the opportunity to reflect and look around and think, I am so lucky that I am so loved to have these people around me. It was one of those moments where I'm going to tell you, Chris, I am emotionally dead inside, and I felt things that day. Like so I'm having emotions. Yeah. It was one of those things where I look back, and if I'm feeling a little bit sad, I just think about the love that was in that room and how damn fortunate I am to have such wonderful people around me.
That's amazing. I love that, emotionally dead inside. I think, again, it doesn't surprise me, and we talked offline about how much alignment we've got, and I share that kind of social awkwardness, even though I can perform and be loud and gregarious and all those things. But also, I struggle to kind of find the emotional side sometimes. I was just thinking about my wedding day and how one of the stories is a negative one that always comes out, which is funny for everyone else but not funny for me. So my middle name is not something I'm particularly pleased with, and of course they say your middle name, when they do you, and so I'll say it out loud now just for the audience. So it was, the scenario was everything's calm and all pretty and everyone's quiet and everyone's emotional, and they said, "Do you Christopher Wayne Baker?" And the whole audience sniggered, kind of thing. Look around like, and then the only other one negative that sticks out is my wife came up to me at the end, like during the party sort of thing. She said, they're giving out the cake. And I said, right. And basically, one of the waitresses had cut the cake before we'd cut the cake. we never got to cut the cake, and it was, my wife was like livid, and then I was like, okay, find some emotional intelligence, so kind of calming everyone down, and it was all sweet.
Well, I mean, if it helps, I cut the cake with one of my good friends who made the cake because she has seen my cake cutting before.
Oh, right.
So she's behind me, guiding me, cutting the cake so I don't butcher it. But I think you've got to have a bit of comedy in a wedding. I know that when I was saying my vows and it came to, do you take this man to be your... I did a deliberate pause and looked around the room, and Scott was like, yeah, go on then.
All right. Well, let's move on to something a bit more kind of, posher, even posher. Your next ignition point, really. And this is what you've called kind of completing my PhD submission. So talk us through that as an ignition point.
Yeah, so it kind of links back to kind of my first one, which I thought was kind of quite useful because as historians, we're storytellers.
Yeah, yeah.
So kind of like connecting where I picked up with that kind of like that renewed kind of like love of academia, but not referencing. Essentially, I decided to embark on my PhD, and a lot of me starting that was my mum passing. So it was a few months later that, a year later, I decided to embark on it, and I've actually used the money that she left me to fund it. And because she was such a guiding light in FE in the region, she inspired me to really care about kind of inclusion and access to education, no matter what age. And so I drew strength from my grief that that's something that she'd always wanted for me, and that it would be a fitting legacy for her
Yeah.
in terms of this something that she's left kind of behind. So that's one part of it. And then the other is the content that I researched and I've written about. The more that I did the research about it, the more it ignited something within me to want to do even more. So I've mentioned before that my PhD is focusing on how we can make sure education is equitable and equal, and that given that so far despite all the fantastic efforts that teachers and leaders who are day in day out grafting to close that gap, there is still this lack of equity within education. And so reading the statistics and going over, so Dr. Nicola Ponsford has done like this inclusion index, and she's done this really great intersectional analysis of 26,000 stakeholders, having a look at the statistics about children who feel that they don't belong, or seeing the differences in grades between the regions. So the Northeast is a grade behind when we're looking at A level and GCSE. And looking at the curriculum that is being taught. So we know that particularly examination specifications are really narrow, and in terms of being representative of the communities that we serve, it's not there. And so it's really galvanized me to want to continue to push for better for our children. So my PhD looks at multiple pillars to try and achieve equity and equality, and it looks at diversity within the curriculum, inclusive teaching and learning practices such as strategies, such as scaffolding. Literacy and oracy is a fundamental right, pastoral mechanisms to promote belonging, and strong leadership with a clear vision for access for all. So that is absolutely like, as I was typing it, I was getting more and more furious. It was like, I think like my husband likened it to as like a chihuahua in high heels typing away furiously as I was like, oh my days, we need to like consider this and this. So it's really provided me with the rocket fuel to want to get involved in future curriculum reviews and to support teachers with developing inclusive practice, as well as working with young people. They are phenomenal. We had a culture day yesterday, and those sixth form leaders were amazing. So to empower them to engage meaningfully with their school communities, to also foster that sense of belonging. And so another final part of it is probably like when I looked at the PhD and I looked at example PhDs, I was like, I can never do this. Syndrome was like wild. So it's again reminded me how children might feel when they embark on their GCSEs or A levels, where it does seem like a daunting task. And how I can better frame when I'm speaking to them that vulnerability of being able to achieve what you can put your mind to, and more aware of looking at things from the lens of a novice rather than an expert.
Yeah,
And
nice. So, I mean, just to pause a second on that kind of, because I think again, our schools are obviously filled with inequity for pupils, but also kind of this idea that there's lots of adults, probably myself and yourself included, who have got kind of like are haunted by self-doubt.
Yeah.
What was the turning point that made you think you academically could do a PhD?
So I think it was kind of working on the books that I've been working on. So things like that I was getting the opportunity to write The Scaffolding Effect.
Yeah.
So if we go back even one step, so when I came up with the idea of what is history teaching now, and then, I was speaking with Rachel Ball and she really wanted to get involved, the fact that I could write a book and that actually it wasn't horrendous, it was good. And then the fact that somebody wanted me to write another one made me think, actually, maybe there's something in my voice that people do want to hear. And I think as a girl from the Northeast, where, regionally there are a lot of stereotypes, and that comes with things like accent and, it's grim up north. So I think a lot of that played into my self-doubt and, who would want to hear from me, like this random lass from Durham. So actually, the more that people are really kind about putting the ladder down and amplifying my voice and giving me the opportunities, made me think, actually, I'm the one that's putting the limitations on myself by saying that I can't, and listening to these kind of like echoes and stereotypes, whereas actually there are people out there who really do believe in me. So maybe just give it a go. And what's the worst that can happen? You fail, but in the end, does that mean that someone's going to die? Does that mean no? It just means that you just got to dust yourself off and kind of
Yeah.
rethink.
Well, again, I think it's another, it links back to our first kind of call to action for leaders that are listening to this about you knowing your staff, but also recognizing that some of them are not taking up opportunities because of a self doubt or a low self efficacy, and that actually as leaders, our role is potentially to be that kind of opposing voice that can say, well, hold on a minute, let me put some facts and figures in front of you. Let me show you all the great stuff you've done. Let me show you all the emails I get from other people saying how amazing you are. And then I guess I'm sure neither of us want to be poster children for PhD, but if you and I can do a doctorate, then sure.
I'm going to confess to you, Chris. Like when I was doing my referencing, I remember being sat on a train and I was having to do the alphabet song
Oh,
to
God.
remember what order the references were in. And I thought, you crikey, how have they let me do like? So if you can reference without needing to do the alphabet song, then you can definitely do it. But I think there's something really beautiful in what you said about making sure that people feel valued, and beyond kind of like the tokenistic, or like performance management or stuff like that. It's about, I had a conversation with a middle leader once who, when I became their line manager, I said, oh, can you tell me about how you like to be recognized and valued?
Oh,
Do you
nice.
like it public? Do you like it private? I want to make sure that you feel that the praise is kind of genuine and right to you. And they said that they'd never had praise before.
Oh,
And
no.
that really, I was just like, yikes. So I think it's how we make sure that people feel seen and feel valued, and that what they do matters. That's something I'm really into.
Love that. All right. Wow. We're going to move into the second launchpad now. So, again, really interesting, this one. It came about originally because I was kind of thinking about how it's called Am I There Yet? And it was basically kind of this sort of not a frustration, because I think I've sadly benefited from this, if you can benefit from it. This
So
idea that you get promoted into leadership probably because of loosely linked competencies. I think I was given a leadership position because I was such a great teacher, and it's like great. At the time, you don't realise it. You just thanks for the compliment. You're flattered, and you want to progress, so that's great. But it started me thinking about kind of this idea of what do we gain in a current role that actually prepares us for going up. And I started playing around with this idea that, I guess from in a specific role, you may gain this kind of domain knowledge, you might get some technical skills, and of course, you get some contextual experience. In terms of that jump to leadership, you may have a complete void and they've never really been asked to think strategically. In my case, manage resources. I mean, somehow I got through the lower levels of kind of leadership without having any sizable budget. And suddenly I was then an assistant principal in charge of teaching and learning, given this huge budget. And I was like, oh. And for me, sadly, I didn't feel psychologically safe to put my hand up and say, I have not got a clue what I'm doing here. So the idea of, again, you might not in your previous roles have had much to do with change management or any HR processes. Certainly, I went, I
100%.
think luckily I went a long way through my career without having to do any kind of capability or investigations or anything like that. But also, there's nothing to say that you have, as an adult, have gained very good self-management skills. Most of us are kind of, I don't know, adults because of age, but not adults because of aptitude, I suppose. And so I started thinking, I guess to step up into larger roles, you have got to have almost a different sort of skill set, which then made me think that I suppose as leaders in schools, we kind of probably got to take quite a long-term view of development. We have to think, okay, let's begin with the end in mind. Let's think about what skills do people need at the higher echelons, I suppose, or let's just kind of take a role all the way to its end. What skills would you eventually need for that? And then see where we can create a PD curriculum that kind of gives them a broad enough base, I suppose, to equip them. Started playing around with this idea of talent mapping, which is, not new, but almost to sort of have a really good awareness as a leader of the potential future stars, so to speak, or people that might be kind of on their way towards that certain job. And again, giving them opportunities as early as possible to even informally develop some of the skills that they might need more formally later. I think potentially, as this suggests, we kind of potentially wait a little bit too long. It's almost like you've got the job, welcome to the job, here's an induction. It's like, well, wow, I probably needed more than that. I think mentoring obviously plays a key part in that. That one-to-one support is super helpful. And then, we've all benefited from this social network that we're in. The amount of things I've learned from just connecting with people like yourself and all the other people that do the rounds on these things is bonkers. And so getting people quite early in their careers into established networks where they can, again, informally pick up some of these skills and experiences or even perspectives, I think is super helpful. So why did it resonate with you, this one?
It's pretty much similar to kind of what you were saying about how, I think I was a good teacher, but, I'd earned my stripes as a teacher and kind of demonstrated that perhaps there was something there. And then all of a sudden I was up in the lofty heights and probably a little bit ill-equipped to do so. So my own experience is probably a little bit different from most trajectories to SLT. So what happened was I was a classroom teacher, and then I got a TLR for teaching and learning, became a lead practitioner, and then I became an associate assistant head teacher. So rather than being a middle leader, although lead practitioners are middle leaders, it was a very different type of middle leadership because it didn't involve line managing people and things like that. So becoming an SLT member suddenly meant that I was in a context where I was responsible for line managing 2 departments, one of which had a very experienced middle leader, with someone who'd never been a middle leader, and then someone who was a new middle leader that was obviously looking to someone to kind of model and demonstrate what to do. But I'd never held a line management meeting and I'd never been in one from the other side of it. So that was kind of a bit like, oh, yikes, what does that look like? And then, when performance management comes around, like, how do I, like, I've been on one side of it. But it also meant compiling reports for things like stakeholders, and diversifying my skill set immediately, because my role, teaching and learning, is like my passion, it's my skill set. But my actual first role was kind of student council, reports, cover, open evenings, awards evenings, then curriculum, and then teaching and learning. And so it meant very much diversifying a skill set, but whilst maintaining our timetable. And how do I then kind of, navigate and learn these different things when there aren't those people there because they've retired or whatever, to kind of be like, how do reports run? How does one do cover? Like, what does that look like? And I was like, I kind of feel cover's an important one as well. And then it was just things like, learning how to hold my own at SLT meetings as well, and how to lead middle leader meetings with the other SLT colleagues when I'd not actually attended one myself. Right. So, yeah, I think it's one of those things where we very much talked about how we can make sure that there is those developmental opportunities available, because I'm such a strong believer in succession planning. Yeah. Like, it should be that, I walk out the door tomorrow and somebody can fill that and know exactly, have the skill set and have the mindset and the tools there to be able to just, run with it. And so I think, as you're saying, it's about having a strong culture of nurturing future leaders and providing them with as much exposure and experience as possible, and making sure that lots of things are open to them. So, I think one thing to consider is, those people who might not take the obvious pathway to SLT, like myself. I was a bit of a renegade. Even the guy that made me an associate assistant head teacher said after the interview, like, we weren't expecting it from you. And I was like, well, hello. And, really just thinking about, what about small rural schools? What can be done to support them? And now that MPQs are kind of the funding is minimised on them, how is it that we can support schools who might not have the structures or the capacity to put into place their own in-house mechanisms? So I think, those are some interesting questions for us to consider as a profession. And also as well, like for those people who have been in leadership that have decided to take a step down, how can we engage them and recognise that experience and expertise to help foster our next generation of leaders? So there's really interesting stuff in that
Really fascinating, yeah. And of course, it makes me think a little bit about one of the benefits of, whether you want to call it instructional coaching or just coaching, the benefits of that sort of rehearsal in a safe space before you're in the arena, so to speak. The opportunity for a non-leader, so someone who doesn't even have a leadership role yet, to experience, see one, practice one, rehearse one before they're required to do one is massive, I think.
And I think scenarios like, managing conflict. I'd never been in a situation where I'd had to kind of manage the conflict. And so actually, as you said, if we had like scenarios where I had the opportunity to practice kind of how I would diffuse it and, how I'd unpick things and get people to kind of look at reconciling or compromising, I think would be really powerful things to equip future leaders with.
It's funny, you've mentioned it a few times, and we're both, fans of cognitive science and stuff, but like, we shouldn't be surprised that as leaders, if we don't have any prior knowledge of something, we're not very good at it.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, 100%. Like, I don't want to do like, the Homer Simpson where he kind of like goes backwards into the book. But it felt like that a lot at SLT, where I was just like, I don't know about this, so I'm just going to blend in the background.
Well, we talked offline before about our experiences, and my experience of doing the ED, suddenly in a room with lots of people who worked in academia and have done recent things, and just flippantly they'd say, right, so if you can do a lit review, or if you can do this and you can do that. And I remember vividly being in some of the sort of data analysis sessions, and they would flippantly just say things like, so if you take the standard deviation and you do this and I'm like, I don't know what the standard deviation is, let alone be able to do something with it, Again, I did not feel safe enough. And again, naturally I link back to confidence in everything I think about, but that can be really paralyzing for a new leader who doesn't have the confidence to do it and doesn't have the confidence to say out loud, I could do with some help here. So there's a call out to all leaders, I suppose, is to start passing off your job way before you actually leave. All right. So we're going to finish off with this last Fast Friends question, which you chose, what personal quality do you think you need to develop the most?
Well, I mean, it depends on who you're asking which quality I need to develop the most. I think my husband would have some interesting insights about that, because he always calls me half a job. He says I've actually got severance, so that I use up all my smart at work, and then when I get home, like, it's just like absolute chaos and it's half a job. So but for me, it was a tough call between perfectionism of myself and an eagerness to please. I am very hard on myself, but I've gone with eagerness to please because, and we were actually talking about this like off screen, which is why I was like, oh yeah. So sometimes what happens is I place my sense of value in the wrong places. And sometimes I've been trying to make myself better, and I'm still not there yet in terms of taking a step back and thinking about what matters in that context and whose voice matters in that context, and where the impact of something truly lies. Because, as you said, I'm conscious of myself, and I want to add value, and I seek a lot of kind of validation. Like, am I doing what you want me to do? Am I giving you the impact that you want me to? Like, am I proving my worth, my value for money? Everything that you've kind of like pinned your hopes on, like, am I doing that? And sometimes it's that thing where, you aren't going to please everyone. And you might not always have, a bit like I said, with that middle leader, you might not have someone come over to you and praise you and say, actually, what you did there was really top drawer, well done. I've heard this, because people are busy and they might not always take that time. But actually, like as I was saying, like yesterday we ran a culture day, and it was our first ever time that we'd done that. And seeing those sixth formers come to life, sharing their cultures, I was like, this is where I place my sense of value. It's these experiences with the children. We had because we're in all through school, so it was year 4 and 5, and like a year 4 student said, oh, this is so much fun. This is the best day of year 4 so far. And I was like, this is like, so anytime that I'm like, am I worthy? Am I having an impact? The fact that I was able to work with those children and for them to put on this phenomenal event, I was like, I just need to remember that a little bit sometimes. But it can be hard. It can be hard.
Super tricky, isn't it? Yeah. So that idea that you are what you're looking externally, are you to for?
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's that thing you always want a pat on the head. Well, I do.
Okay,
Yeah. It's that thing where it's just, someone to come over and say, actually, that's working really quite well, because I think it can be the thing that we are very self-critical.
yeah.
We're always looking at that thing that we could do to improve something, or what's gone wrong with something and what we should have done better. And it can be nice to have that external voice kind of just providing you with that. Actually, as we were saying before, look, here are the stats, here are the figures, here's the journey that we've come on. We're not there yet, but we're on our way and we're further than we were. And I think also sometimes as an SLT, because we are always trying to do our best, it can be that we look at, where a strategy hasn't quite hit the mark yet. And again, it's how we balance that with, saying to someone, that's really top draw. Is it worth considering? Let's and it links back to that psychological safety, so that someone can feel that sense of value, but understand positive development in terms of suggestions of what to improve.
Yeah, I love that. It feels like there's a bit of a theme running through today for kind of people to take away this idea that if you're in a leadership position and you've got members of a team that you look after, the first thing we talked about was, seeing about how alight their fire is, and whether they need something to kind of, stoke it a little bit. And then we started talking a bit, then we midway through this, about how for lots of us, we've got these kind of dissenting voices, that Tim Peters would call it the chimp, when he that kind of chimp paradox, who's shouting out loud, kind of, you're not worthy, you're not worthy, you're not, valid. And if you recognise you've got people like that, then you need to be the voice that counteracts it. And then the last bit, I think, which is fascinating, is sort of recognizing who needs what and not putting a judgment on that. If you've got people in your team who need a lot of validation, the response is, well, they shouldn't need a lot of validation. Well, they do.
Yeah.
So, that's just where it is. And I also think that I'm constantly reminded that those acts of validation don't need to be big. It's the odd comment, it's the odd email, it's the tiny passing conversation, great work this week. Tiny little things, isn't it?
Yeah, 100%. Like, nobody's looking for kind of the Ferris Bueller kind of marching band sort of situation going on. In terms of, yeah, well done, you turned up to work today, but actually, if you've had a 5-lesson day, you're a full timetable teacher, you've had a 5-lesson day on, a day where it's hot, bees have been swarming in and out of the classroom, the fire alarm's gone off, all those sorts of things, like rocking up consistently and delivering really good teaching and learning to children should be something which is met with, a damn good applause every now and again. And just as he said, just walking past and saying, you know what, you're doing a really good job and I appreciate you. And I think telling someone that they're appreciated and what they do is seen, I think is really powerful. Because we can get locked away in our classrooms and think no one knows what we're doing, and all those micro things that we're doing, which is making a child's life that little bit better. And I think somebody saying, I saw that.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, I just want to thank you and appreciate you for it.
I saw that and I see you.
Yeah.
Yeah, nice. Well, what an absolute joy. Tell some people how they can kind of connect with your work or you socially.
So I'm on LinkedIn as Alex Fairlamb, so absolutely do drop me a line, or you can find me on X with a really unhelpful handle of @lamb_heart_t, or I know the kids will never find me this way, but no one can find me. And then if you do want me to come into your school and do some work on things like adaptive teaching or scaffolding, then I do have a website, which is alexfairlamb.com, and you can find me through there.
And don't forget the book.
Oh, Brad will never forgive me, and Rachel. Yes, so the most recent book that we've got is The Scaffolding Effect. It's part of the Inner Drive series, which is a phenomenal series. It's like a stellar lineup of, like, I mean, talk about imposter syndrome when you've got like Jade Pierce, Nikki Sullivan, Harry Hughes, like Brad Bush. So yeah, our book has been out since the end of July. It's about scaffolding and how we can ensure that there are really powerful scaffolding strategies taking place, and why differentiation is something to reconsider. And you can get that at all good bookstores, and yeah.
Well, I'll put all the links in the chat, and yeah, so connect with Alex, and if you're interested in all the Launchpad stuff, then connect with me and go to leadershiplaunchpads.com. And yeah, thanks very much for listening, and we'll see you at the next one.